Jake, I hate video game remakes. They're anti-art. They just keep shoveling the same ideas and mechanics that we've had since like the 90s and spitting it back into our mouths. It's baby birds all the way down. And worst of all, no other industry does this. Right?
A critical error is an error which the OS cannot reasonably ignore. Jake Steinberg is a streamer, writer, and certified yapper. Complimentary. Peter Hunt Szpytek is a YouTuber, journalist, and certified yapper. Derogatory. These are the things they cannot reasonably ignore.
Remake discourse is like synonymous with video game discourse. A lot of people seem to intuit that there is tension between the artistic pursuit of creating a video game and then kind of the capitalist pursuit of generating the most value with the least amount of work. So one of these arguments that come up, I think, around remakes constantly is this idea that, you know, you see a video game remake announced and somebody will claim that a remake is somehow less artistic than the original game that it is remaking. So you'll hear people say things like, imagine if they remade a great work of art. Imagine if they remade Moby Dick. And the implication there is that great works of art should not be revisited, that the first version is sacred and everything after it is either derivative or some kind of ploy to generate value based around the greatness of that first piece of art. Is this a fair way to kind of start this conversation, this framing of how people talk about it?
Yeah, it feels like you are either like very pro remake because you're just like, well, I just want to see, you know, these sorts of same things again, or you're very anti remake, saying like, no, it's all just slop. But what I think is interesting is that I think that like there are actually nuanced takes for both sides, I feel like, that go sort of untalked about. One of the things you hit on here that is most fascinating to me is the idea that, like, a remake is a slap in the face to artistic intent because it only exists as a way to serve the more corporate side of the video game industry. And I would like to say that a few things can be true at the same time, that can be true. Like we've seen like all sorts of remakes that are, in my opinion, not really new artistic takes on a video game. You look at The Last of Us Part 1, a remake of The Last of Us, which, I mean, is shot for shot, frame for frame, the exact same video game, right? It's not a remaster in the sense that the technical side of it on the like development side is different, but it is certainly a remake that feels a little bit like it was made specifically to sell copies of The Last of Us 1 when that TV show came out, and not because someone wanted to sit down and say, reimagine The Last of Us, right? But then you have like other remakes. You have things like Final Fantasy VII Remake or that Silent Hill 2 remake, which are not beat for beat exactly the same as those original games and have like a take on them. And so I think it's interesting to say that like those games have no like artistic integrity to them when they are remakes, but it is clear to me that the people who made them had this idea of like, we want to have a take on this. We want to adapt this for a new era and maybe even make something that could be in conversation with that original work of art, you know? And so it's this interesting thing where people like to say that remakes are only this one thing without taking into consideration and account that, no, they actually can be just as valid works of art as the original work.
Oh, 100%. And I think something you're hitting on here is almost this issue of perception that people really struggle with when it comes to remakes. Because I think the thing that makes when you talk about that remake that's so concerned with fidelity to the source material, that maybe is this version of something that already exists. And it was, what was the example you used was The Last of Us?
The Last of Us, yeah.
And my understanding of that remake is that it is almost like imperceptible visual change is what we're talking about there.
I mean, it's this thing where like if you play them back to back, you would go, yeah, that new one looks better. Like
okay.
It's very easy to see, hey, no, this is a visual upgrade. But at the end of the day, it's not like a take on that game in the way that something like that Silent Hill 2 remake is a take on Silent Hill 2.
And then I think where the issue of identification is that it's not necessarily that the Last of Us remake is doing something artistically poor as much as it is. I think it is a new video game that exists in the context of The Last of Us already existing.
Yes.
And that's like kind of a weird thing to think about. So let me try to explain this to the listener. But oftentimes this conversation comes up. I promise this will circle back around and make
Please.
sense, between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And people will say, if you like Breath of the Wild more than Tears of the Kingdom, you're just lying, because Tears of the Kingdom is more than Breath of the Wild. It is Breath of the Wild with stuff stacked on top of it. Now, I am one of these people who does like Breath of the Wild more, and I think part of that is that Tears of the Kingdom exists in a world where Breath of the Wild already exists.
Yeah.
So there is a way in which that game hits me and hits a person who has experienced Breath of the Wild already that is fundamentally different from how Breath of the Wild hit me when that game came out. Now, I'm not interested in this objectivity discourse over removing my perspective and saying, well, now that I have played Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, if I go back to Breath of the Wild, do I think that Tears of the Kingdom is objectively better? That I am interpreting the games with whatever I have available to me at the moment to interpret.
Yeah.
So, is part of the lack of value in The Last of Us remake tied to how it goes about pursuing its like what the product actually is, or is it the fact that we live in a world where The Last of Us already exists?
No, I think that's what it is, right? It's just that it's too close, right? It doesn't take it far enough, because what I think makes a remake so interesting is, especially like older games, is like, okay, well, what does that older game look like if you were to try and make that same premise now? That's when it starts to get quite interesting. And so like, I'm kind of interested to see right before we started recording this, apparently Ubisoft like confirmed the fact that they have that Assassin's Creed 4 remake in the works. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't, but cool.
It's been rumored for like 10 years.
Okay.
that they're going to do a remake.
The pirate one?
Yeah, the pirate one.
Okay. Yeah.
And so what I find interesting about that is it's like, okay, that at this point is a game that's 12 years old. Sorry to make us all feel like, decrepit skeletons, but 12 years old. That game came out in like 2013 or 2014. And so what does that game look like now? I think it's worth exploring and being open to that as a concept.
Yeah, I think sometimes it would help us to not be so hoity-toity about how we talk about these things, because the fact of the matter is that games are inseparable from hardware and controls and interface conventions and all of these other visual technology. It is remaking a game is not the same as rewriting a novel.
Correct.
You are not just like, you could remake a book. You could, and we do this all of the time, and we especially do this in movies, but the art of I use the word rewriting there very specifically. It is not, we are taking the book, which is the same, and we are trying to, I don't know, replicate the words on the page, because we can do that, and turns out the words on the page are the same. But does a remake of something like Moby Dick exist? Of course it does. Of course it does. I just picked up a new book called Call Me Ishmael, and it's like spelled differently, so it's like Mael or whatever, and it's if Ishmael, it's like a gender bent Moby Dick. And it like strongly adheres to the original story, adds in some new content, if you will, and is a new take. Yeah. And I don't think we need to go into how remakes exist in film and are extremely competent and presenting stories through a new reinterpreted lens. Like, I think that this is very like obvious material, but the difference is when we talk about games, I do think it is worth kind of correcting that category error, because a finished literary object is not the same, because a video game is a system plus a work of technology. There are multiple factors at play there, right?
Yes. I find it kind of fascinating. You bring up like other remakes that exist outside of the video game industry. Like, it's all over the place. I think about like Pride and Prejudice is like from my understanding, just from my like perspective, like something that I've seen the most remakes for, sometimes it's something that it has sort of like a different slant to it. Like there's a book called, I think it's called the Other Bennett Sister, and it focuses on like one of the younger ones who's like doesn't really talk that much. She plays the piano, I think. And it's like the events from her perspective and then more, which is an interesting take on a, you know, a piece of classic literature. But then like also there's like more like obvious sorts of remake stuff like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which is a remake of Pride and Prejudice, but it has a take, right? It has a kind of a spin to it. And I think that it is so easy to see that this sort of stuff happens and is a part of art appreciation and art culture. And to sort of write off the idea that video game remakes are exclusively things that are made as lazy cash grabs, I think kind of sits with me the wrong way. Because I will say that like sometimes I fall victim into this myself. They just announced that they're remaking the God of War trilogy, right? And so like my initial first blush reaction to that is like, hey, why would you do that when the most recent two God of War games are sort of about reckoning with the past and saying like, hey, you don't have to be that person anymore, right? That the Kratos in those games is like not a good guy, and he's like reckoning with all of that in God of War and God of War Ragnarok. And so like my initial reaction to hearing like, oh, they're remaking these games was like kind of negative, because I'm like, yeah, but like why, if the whole point was we don't need to, you know, be the people we used to be, would you want to then be the person that you used to be?
But that's not exactly what's going on there.
Right. But then it's the thing where it's like, that's, you know, it's possible though that they're not just doing a beat for beat remake, but that they are framing it in a way that is going to work as a companion to that story and framing it in a way, you know what I mean? Like it's possible.
Sure. They didn't know that they were going to make God of War, the reboot, when they made those original God of War games. Yes. So there is obviously you can kind of now recontextualize the past so that it maybe more cleanly leans into the fact that that's where we know the story is going. But also, moving on from the past is not the same as pretending it never existed. Right. And I think that the fact that it exists is important to me. And remakes don't replace the original thing ever.
No. What I find, like, this is the interesting part, you know, you mentioned like the intersection of like technology and art. This is the thing that is frustrating though, when like, you know, a remake is made and then that old version is just like gone, you know, like you can't, like, you know, Silent Hill 2, you can get that on Steam or PlayStation or whatever, but like you can't get the original version of that game anymore unless you were playing it on the PlayStation 2.
Yeah, but I want to be clear about this because I think there's maybe like a bad faith interpretation of what we're talking about that responds to us. So it's like, well, Jake, in these situations where these companies take down the original versions of the game and then replace them with the remakes and yada 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 yada, and it's like listen, but that's not a remake issue. That's a preservation issue.
Yes, and that's a corporate issue. Like,
of course,
obviously that sucks. Obviously, yes.
And I would even add that the preservation issue at play there is not necessarily that every single video game ever made needs to be made available to play on whatever hardware, whatever. Like, I don't think that that's it either. Yes. I think the preservation issue is that we need to be able to culturally curate and preserve the original meaning of these things ourselves, separate from actually having access to those games. You should be able to read about them or watch videos and documentaries about them. That's the preservation issue at play there. But I really want to focus in on something that we've kind of been circling here for a minute, and it's just that like this you brought this up with the God of War thing and kind of like retreading the same material in every medium. The thing that matters the most to any story is not the raw events. It's not the raw sequence of events of the story. Yeah. And I think to kind of pretend that because something is a remake and it is maybe adhering to an outline and that being an issue is like insane to me. That would be like looking at The Lion King and saying, well, because Hamlet, it's just Hamlet. Like it's just, you're just spinning in the face of Hamlet. And so there's no value to it. But obviously the same narrative material can produce radically different work depending on how it is told. Like this is like so basic. I think the events themselves are often the least interesting part of these stories, and what we really remember is the interpretation. And again, film culture understands this so quickly, so easily. No one is confused when there are multiple versions of A Star is Born. No one is confused when there are endless adaptations of, like you said, Pride and Prejudice, or like Little Women, or the fact that like every single generation stages the same Shakespeare plays over and over and over again. Why would I go see Rachel Zegler in Romeo and Juliet? It's just a remake of that thing that they were doing hundreds of years ago. Turns out there is a take, and you are able to have a take. You are able to have explicit, new, beautiful meaning, new interpretations that are revelatory by not changing the sequence of events at all, by not veering from the original material at all. How is that possible? How can I stage two versions of the same play using the same script and have two completely different versions of meaning erupt from those productions, right? I used to do musicals professionally, and I was in 3 different professional productions of a musical called The Last 5 Years, in which I played the same character. And each one of these directors that I was in this show for had a different take on my character. And there was one director who I didn't like this. Okay, that's a little mean. This was not my favorite interpretation. But one director literally said to me, what we're doing here is that no one is going to be confused about the fact that you are the bad guy. And I was like, whoa. Part of the musical to me was that there was this question.
It's ambiguous.
Is this, oh, who do you side with at the end? And this person said, no. This one, by the time we hit this point in the show, everyone's gonna go, kill that man. and it was a take, and it represented a worldview, and it generated meaning for people in a way that other versions of this show did not.
Yes. There's something fascinating here, right? About this idea that like, just because we're doing something again means it's wrong. And like, I do tend to push back on, I do tend to like, let me start over here.
Yeah.
I tend to take issue when a remake is purely a visual thing, if it is something that is already available. So, you know, we brought up The Last of Us Part 1 here. That is a remake that I just don't get a whole lot out of, because The Last of Us Remastered was already there, and then The Last of Us, like the original game, was already there, and those are perfectly good-looking, playable versions of that game, right? And so basically a version that's just a visual overhaul and very little else just doesn't do a whole lot for me. I feel the same way about something like the Demon's Souls remake, which is almost exclusively a visual overhaul. That's more of a remaster, which is another, I think, problem here is the fact that like the term remake, remaster, reimagining, like it's all so jumbled up, right?
Why do you think? Can I? Yeah. Why do you think there is this insistence on the part of the gamer to think that the remake or the remaster should serve primarily the person who is familiar with the original?
No, that's the weird thing, right? Because you hear this thing all the time about like, no one asked for this. We didn't ask for this remake. We didn't ask for this thing. And it like, again, I'm not naive to the fact that there is a corporate element at play, and that these companies are wanting to make things that people will buy and will want to buy. But like, do you have to ask for art to be made, or can an artist not just make a piece of art, you know?
And isn't it kind of, I think that there is something undervalued about an artist wanting to, having such reverence for a work that they want to be the one to quote unquote remake it. A remake, you could say, or a loose adaptation, whatever you want to call it, that was just kind of in the zeitgeist recently, was Wuthering Heights, the movie.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. My wife is somebody who like really likes Jane Austen books, and has always said to me that she kind of has aspirations of writing a movie based on one of the Jane Austen books. She would like to do that. And I'm somebody who has always had aspirations of writing like a Superman story. Yeah. And I don't like the idea that, I think that there is this idea that's negativity towards remakes that kind of insists or implies that I should feel bad about my creative aspirations because 100% of the idea is not generated out of me, because I am taking advantage of an intellectual property or something, as if there are creative works that are somehow in a vacuum from all influence, and which is just not true. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So
It's interesting too because you look at this idea of like loose adaptation, and like loose adaptation is interesting to me, and whether or not you like the Wuthering Heights movie like is to me kind of irrelevant.
Which I do.
I know you like it, yeah. But I kind of have this perspective where I'm like, even if you don't like it, isn't it good that that thing got made?
Or like, I would not question that somebody wanted to make that is the other thing.
Right, that's the other thing, because I know I worry that people are going to be like, well, Peter, in your video about the Last of Us HBO TV show, you besmirched the name of the Beauty and the Beast live action remake. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if that director was like, you know what I want to do? I want to remake the Beauty and the Beast. You know, it's this thing where it's like, no, there is, of course, an era of corporate agenda that a lot of remakes serve, right?
And it's not because it's a remake, though. It's because you look at the remake of the Beauty and the Beast, and in the context of the Beauty and Beast already existing, it begs the question, what is the take here? What is this adding? What is the value of this? It wasn't sunk when they said we're remaking Beauty and the Beast.
Correct. It was sunk when you watch the movie and you go,
made.
I get it. I see what this is.
Yes.
And I think that's what's tough is that's a vibes based feeling, right? Like there's no like empirical evidence that that's the case unless we find some emails from whatever executive saying we need to do this because of whatever, which is difficult because then when it comes back to games, it's like, well, I think you could probably make that argument for any video game remake, right? But at the end of the day, I do think there are some that are a little bit more obviously going for that versus some that are born out of a team saying like, we've got to take here. And I think it's interesting.
Can I introduce a remake that has recently been kind of brought back into the contemporary zeitgeist?
Are you about to talk about Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green?
I am. And it's because, I've got my little primate sitting right here next to me. And he was like begging me. He was like, Jake, come on, you've got an example right at the tip of your tongue here. So I think like Fire Red and Leaf Green are funny remakes because it's this great example of, if you asked people like, what is the take for Fire Red and Leaf Green? I think a word that would come up a lot, something that people would reference, is the term quality of life. Sure. And that's the big difference between red and blue. And I think when people talk about quality of life, sometimes it is this shorthand that cuts us off from engaging with effect. That is like what is happening, but how does that actually affect the experience of playing the games? And like my interpretation of what is happening in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green is that you look back at Pokemon Red and Blue. These were experimental games built around all of these kind of new radical ideas. And even the ideas that like things that are commonplace now, that you were meant to talk to other kids and trade Pokemon and like fill in the gaps of the experience of the games together. That's radical. But because the developers were maybe inventing this genre as they went along, a lot of people would say the Pokemon Red and Blue are they're rough. The systems are inconsistent. The mechanics are maybe poorly explained. There's balance issues, right? And Fire Red and Leaf Green, the way that they're operating is that they revisit the structure, I don't know, however many years later, and they ask, what is the cleanest possible version of the idea that we were so interested in originally? Now that we have years of experience and maybe understand our design philosophy more than we did at the first draft, I think that every major change in Fire Red and Leaf Green is pushing the experience towards readability and intentionality, so that you see that the mechanics are more standardized, the UI is dramatically clearer. There are changes to the Pokemon Learn sets that I think are maybe more rational for what they're trying to achieve. And all of this stuff is about trying to harness the original meaning of those games, and I think try to make that experience as clean as possible. And something that I really like about the re-release of Fire Red and Leaf Green on the Nintendo Switch in particular is that this port eschews modernizing some elements that could easily be modernized. We see how through game chat and game share through Nintendo Switch Online, you can easily emulate online functionality for these old Game Boy Advance games. But This game does not. There is no global trading system in this game. There is no way to connect with your friends online and trade Pokemon or do battles or any of that, because the game is preserving the friction that forces players to interact with each other. And that friction was the thematic core of Pokemon in 1996. The idea that this game world extends beyond the world in front of you, and it's important to talk to others and expand your worldview through social connections. So the remake, now Fire Red and Leaf Green, I think is a preservation effort of the original experience, while also sharpening it and adding new things to heighten that level. It's like taking another shot at a movie. It's like,
Yes.
saying we're going to do A Star Is Born again. It's stuff like that.
Can I say too? So we have an hour-long conversation about Pokemon Fire Red, Leaf Green on our Patreon for the Critical Error Nation. Patreon.com/Critical Error. If you're interested in hearing that is uploading the day that this episode goes live as well. So if you want to hear even more about these games, I think it was actually a very, very interesting and productive conversation from my perspective as someone who's like not a huge diehard Pokemon person playing these games, and then hearing from you, someone who does know these games sort of a little bit more inside and out than I do. I thought it was just an interesting conversation to have. So if that sounds cool to you, Patreon.com/Critical Error, take a look there. But something you brought up in that conversation that I just want you to touch on a little bit here, because obviously we had a much more in-depth version of that in the bonus episode. But you mentioned the idea that this game is actually not the exact same as the original, because it does add newer mechanics that weren't in the original, was it abilities, or was it
abilities? Yeah.
And how, by adding abilities, it actually creates an interesting dynamic here. You were talking in the bonus episode about how Mankey has an ability that allows him to not fall asleep. There he is. Sorry, that's his older brother, Primate. He has this ability that allows him to not be able to be inflicted with the sleep status effect. And you find Mankey in the same place that you find, was it Jigglypuff, or is it?
Jigglypuff, yes.
Yeah, and how that's different in these new ones, and that wasn't the case in the original ones, and they weren't placed together. But it's like, okay, if you're grinding through these Jigglypuffs and having this issue, it's like, no, the solution to the Jigglypuff puff problem is right here.
Yes. Yes,
and that's intentional tinkering from the devs, saying well, what if, using this new system, what if we created this interesting dynamic in this one small little ecosystem?
Yeah, because the abilities are something that came later in the Pokemon games. They came with the Generation 3 games of Ruby and Sapphire. And it's like, okay, now in a modern context, we have these abilities. How can we use that to heighten what we were trying to achieve in Generation 1? So you go back, Red, Blue, Yellow, Route 3, Jigglypuff and Mankey are not there together. But because we have abilities, it is something we can use to communicate information in the same way that, you go to the Viridian Forest and it's full of bugs and the birds eat the bugs. And then Pikachu is there. Small chance you're going to encounter Pikachu. You'll never guess who Pikachu is stronger than. Who you thought was the predator in the forest, the Pidgeys. Yeah. And it's like, it's another lever that you can pull to kind of achieve the effect that the original games were striving for. And does this now, and then here's this question: do Fire Red and Leaf Green replace the originals? I don't think so. There is an entirely original aesthetic to those original games, and I think that there is meaning to be found in the messiness and how revolutionary those original games were. So I love this kind of new expression of this original thing. I think that there is a take here, and you will find that there are people who have preferences between the first one and the remake, and I think both of those preferences are valid.
Yeah, but it's this thing where if you look at this idea of being completely anti-remake, and you're like, okay, well then Fire Red and Leaf Green shouldn't exist, and it's like, okay, but there is this interesting take that's here. There's this interesting sort of artistic take, and again, we could talk about the financial incentive of remaking a Pokemon game and reselling them even now with ports, sure. and how the Pokemon company is this, that, and whatever. But it's like right. But from an artistic standpoint, is it not fascinating that these games exist?
And you are potentially getting somebody into something that they otherwise maybe would have missed. And I think even in the most extreme example of that Last of Us remake game, it's like there are people who probably played the Last of Us remake who didn't play the original Last of Us game. And if what it takes is some modern contrivances in whatever form that reveals itself in, is that so terrible?
Yeah, it's this interesting thing, right? Where like, hey, you've got people engaging with this work of art, you know, and I think that's kind of cool. Can I talk to you about Bloodborne for a second?
I was actually, you and I just had a mind meld because I was right there with you, and it's funny how I think the anti-remake crowd would also put down their swords for something like Bloodborne.
Yes, which I think is really interesting because I recently replayed Bloodborne, I guess last year. So it's been almost a year since I replayed it, but I played the fuck out of it. I got the platinum. I thoroughly explored Bloodborne in a way that I hadn't before. I'd played it twice before, but this time was like, I'm doing all of it. I'm doing all the bosses. I'm doing all the chalice dungeons, which is a nightmare. Don't do that. But like, I really, really got deep into Bloodborne. I'm playing it on the PS5, right? Base PS5.
Yeah.
And a lot of the complaints that people have about Bloodborne seem to be revolving around its like frame rate, which I think personally on the PS5, it runs at a pretty solid 30 FPS, which I understand some people that is toxic poison to them. I'm built a little different. It doesn't really bother me if it's a solid 30 frames per second, but I understand that in an action game like Bloodborne, having more frames is certainly preferable. That said, I think there are 2 quality of life changes I would make to Bloodborne if I could make them. I think you should be able to, I'm going to talk specifically about Bloodborne for a second here. I think you should be able to teleport between the little lanterns without having to go to the hub world first and head out. I think it just would be a lot easier if you didn't have to sit through 2 loading screens to get anywhere. I also think that when you have an excess of items and then you run out of those items in your inventory, the items that have been sent to your like stash should just automatically refill in your inventory. I think it's weird that they don't do that. Other than those 2 things, and then I guess the fact that it doesn't run at 60 frames per second, which to me, again, doesn't really matter, but I understand that's a big thing for some people. So let's say those 3 things. Bloodborne feels like a video game that came out in the year 2026. It feels fresh. It's good. It's really, really good. So the question is, remaking Bloodborne, which is something that Blue Point Games, rest in peace now, has been shut down, pitched to Sony, and FromSoft said no. Everyone's like, well, why? Why? It would have been so good. It would have been so good. And I'm not here to say that they wouldn't have had a take on it, because I think I'm open to the idea of people having a take on a piece of art, right? But what would that accomplish? And I think there's this, as what you just pointed out, there's a certain sect of people online who are anti-remake until they're remaking a game that I like.
Which is so funny too, because in this particular scenario, is the Bloodborne game is incredibly easy to access in a modern.
Yeah,
you can just buy and play that game absolutely no problem. And Bloodborne is also the game that like made everybody like Bloodborne. So
what do you mean?
So how desperate for a remake can a video game be if it is the game that made everybody fall in love with it?
Sure.
This isn't like there were all of these other games that people really liked, and then Bloodborne came out and they were like, oh, this game would be good if only it was better in these ways. Like, no. People played Bloodborne and they were like, oh, I love this game. This is my favorite game of all time. So if that's the case, how can we really say that there's anything critically wrong with it? You kind of get what I'm going for here. It doesn't make sense to me.
But it's this other thing though too, where it's like if they were to remake Bloodborne and do like a take on it, right, and like have it be like significantly different, or have it be from a different perspective, or something like that, I'm kind of back on board. Like I am on board because I think that's interesting, because then it is more than just a simple reskin, right, and a handful of quality of life updates. Like it is actually doing the thing that we're talking about, that a good remake, a good piece of art would do, where it could push people to examine the game differently. That said, you look at the track record of Blue Point Games, which again now is gone, but you look at the track record of that studio, and it tends to sit more firmly in that remaster, sort of just strictly visual upgrade sense. You look at the Demon Souls remake, visual upgrade. You look at the Nathan Drake collection, visual upgrade. Shadow of the Colossus, visual upgrade. It's not to say it's bad, but it is a lot more simple than actually coming up with, hey, here's a new interpretation of this piece of art.
I think that there's maybe something fundamentally dishonest happening the more I consider this Bloodborne thing, because I think what's really going on there is that there are certain games that I think have maybe been elevated into a level of the video game canon, and they are important, not only points of reference for video games, but they are also important to the self-identity of the gamers who like them.
Yes.
When somebody says they like Bloodborne, I don't know how much they like it versus how much they're really just trying to tell other people that they are the kind of video game player that likes Bloodborne. That aside, I think that once a game enters this tier, the reason that people so desperately want this kind of Bloodborne remake or remaster is because they want this canonical work to exist in the best possible form. They want it to exist with the best frame rate on the best hardware with the best resolution.
Yeah.
And I think that that's all fine, but I also think that maybe if we're being entirely honest with ourselves, the thing that people actually want is more akin to the restoration of a film, in which case I would say I think what you want is a patch.
Yes. Well, because it's this thing. I gotta stop saying it's this thing. By the way, I realize that's one of my little. Critical Error Nation and anyone listening who may not be a part of the nation, but if you want to join, patreon.com/critical error. Let's hold me to that. All right. There's got to be some sort of shaming that has to happen for when I say it's this thing.
See, but you can't start this, though, because then it's going to kick back on me and the degree to which deploy.
Sure. Yeah, the language that we just frequently pull out of our pockets. Anyway, in regards to what you're talking about here, this is the thing that I sort of take issue with when it comes to the culture surrounding remakes, where it's like, I think the people who are clamoring for a Bloodborne remake aren't looking for a take. They aren't looking for something that is going to change the canon of Bloodborne. Not that it can, because Bloodborne already exists, right? But they are not looking for something new out of Bloodborne. They are looking for Bloodborne again. And obviously, I'm generalizing here, so maybe not representing every single opinion here. But from my perspective, it seems that the opinion about a Bloodborne remake is simply, I want it again. I want more of it.
I think I'm identifying something here. So there's a certain kind of anxiety in which, again, this is kind of objectivity discourse, where people look at what Bloodborne is right now and say, well, the problems with it that a remake or a remaster would fix are objective flaws and not really part of that game. There is a imagined perfect version of the game that I actually want to exist for the sake of this game that I really love so much. But now, turn the clock back. Look at a different game. Look at something like a Super Metroid, okay? And a remake of this game would not generate the same kind of enthusiasm as something like Bloodborne would, because the limitations of that game, the parts of the game that might stop people from interacting with it by this kind of gamer that wants to see themselves as a scion of the prestige gaming experience, would say that actually those elements are an important part of the game and you should have to experience them. Any kind of friction that you experience when you try to boot up Super Metroid, that old game, is actually something that you, to prove something about your gamer citizenship, should have to go through. And that's fucked. Okay, that's like, I'm sorry I don't have a better way of expressing it, but that is ridiculous. And I think it is founded almost entirely in posturing.
And so I agree, but it's also I'm also okay with getting a remake of that does sand some of those edges off if it is in favor of doing something else, right? We talked about Fire Red Leaf Green a lot in that bonus episode, right? Patreon.com/critical error.
That's all we talked about.
Right, yes. However, but we talk about like the friction that exists in the pushback that the game has on the player, and how it pushes you to make choices, and it pushes you to engage with its mechanics in ways that a lot of the newer Pokemon games, while not remakes exactly, but iterations on, the core principles of those original games, have sanded away, and how it makes for a lesser experience, in my opinion. But so I'm interested in seeing a new take on something, right? On a Super Metroid, on I don't know if they remade The Legend of Zelda 1. I'm interested in seeing that. Didn't they do? No, it was a different one. They did the
Link's Awakening.
That's what it was.
Is it so terrible that I'm like, man, I would really like to experience what Pokemon Red and Blue inspired, but to be honest, I'm a zoomer, and this black and white screen and this weird going through the menus and the PC boxes, that is too much of a deterrent from me experiencing this thing? Is it so terrible that a version of this thing is made that is meant to achieve similar feelings in me, and that is my point of access to this thing? I'm not saying that it replaces that original thing.
Right.
But maybe I just like the methods of delivery. Maybe I'm here for the structure of this thing in a different way, in the same way that I personally have no interest really in playing Super Metroid, no matter how many people tell me that it's on the wall, the Mount Rushmore of video games.
Yeah.
Is it so terrible that I would like to see a version of Super Metroid achieved that is more in tune with my video game sensibilities and maybe made closer in the image to something like a Metroid Dread? Is that so terrible? I'm not saying you should. Now that I play this remake, I'm gonna delete Super Metroid from the medium's existence. I guess I just don't really see how a remake of this game meaningfully hurts anyone. And if like is a game called Metroid that is like, is Metroid Dread truly better for the medium in a way that Super Metroid is, a remake of Super Metroid is not? If I simply make a remake of Super Metroid and call it something else, is that okay? Like, what are we like?
No, I know what you're getting at here, because my answer is yeah, it's both. Both are good. Both are good. And then what's interesting, I don't know, I always find it an interesting conversation to have about like, okay, well, what did the original do? And is that achieved in the remake? And how? And if it is modernizing this and sanding those edges off, do those edges come back in different ways? I think that's fascinating, right? Something that has been on the mind a lot for me over the past several years, and I don't know, there's been scuttle about this for like 5 years, and it seems like it's just scuttle right now, but Resident Evil 1. So there's the original Resident Evil on like the original PlayStation, and then they remade it on the GameCube, and there's a remastered version of the remake that is available on all platforms.
Right.
I think that remake is quite good.
Yeah.
Like that. So I'm just going to say, like, when I say Resident Evil 1, I'm talking about that game. That's the one I've played.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fucking phenomenal. But it does the gamer sin, the sin of modern video games. It has fixed camera angles that some people just can't get down with. They just can't do it. And I understand, because we are so accustomed to having this button, this thumbstick, control the camera. And the second that it doesn't do that, it's kind of freaky and it's kind of weird. I think replaying the Resident Evil 1 remake is quite good, because it decouples you from the traditional video game mechanics that we are all used to in the modern era of third-person action games. However, there's been talk of remaking Resident Evil 1 again in the style of the Resident Evil 2, 3, 4 remakes. I am skeptical of that idea, because the thought of just placing doing one of those games in that mansion without the fixed camera angles, to me, changes the intent of the art and changes the intention of it. However, I am interested in that because it is a take at the very least. And it's like, okay, if you're getting rid of those fixed camera angles, are you replacing what those do with anything? And I think it's very possible that they do change something in a way that makes it interesting and is a take on this, you know?
Wow, that is such an interesting question, because fixed camera angles as a concept do not make something good. It is what they are achieving that makes something good.
Would you say it's how they're deployed?
I would. And you could... Oh my God! What is another word? What is another word besides deploy? But you could,
do it.
You could, implement a mechanical idea that achieves something similar to, like, there's no way the feelings that the fixed camera angles inspired can only be achieved through that method. There's no way.
Right.
Yeah.
So what else? Is there another take that can be made? And I think there is. And I think that's something that you could do, and that I would be really interested to see, because if you're getting rid of something that I think is so vital to the experience, so central to the experience of Resident Evil 1 as the fixed camera angles, then you got to replace it with something. And so what do you replace it with?
Can you generate a sense of spatial tension without, without those fixed camera angles, right?
Yeah.
And I think, like, man, it's so interesting. I think what I'm really kind of like butting up against in this entire conversation is maybe this like hoity-toity perspective that a video game being historically or artistically important is I should be able to derive I should force myself to derive joy from that, even if I don't think it's pleasant to play. And I think there is somebody who is like, yeah, turns out the way that you treat art as real art is by accepting that it doesn't always have to be pleasant to play. And it's like, yeah, I agree with that. I think that that's real, but I'm not going to ignore that, like, entertainment and pleasure exists. I'm not going to pretend that
There's
I'm
multiple
a
pillars, right? Yeah.
I'm not pretending that I'm sitting down at my leather fucking chair every day, cracking open my Nintendo Switch 2 in the same way that I like read a book and I'm like, oh, yeah, you know, I mean, like, what are we doing in that weird little performance? And I think, like, qualities can be historically interesting and worth investigating, and I think that they can also be barriers for modern players, and I don't think that it's some kind of artistic sacrifice to recognize that. And I would even say, like, if you look at something like the Odyssey, which, the Odyssey, yes, you know, if you look at something like the Odyssey, when we read the Odyssey, we're reading modern translations of it.
Yeah.
And when you watch a classic film, you're not watching that classic film, you're watching a modern restoration of that classic film. You are attending a new production of Shakespeare. It's like, it has to, a cultural work survives this way.
Yes.
And a remake, I think, is simply a version of the thing that more people are meant to engage with. And I don't like this perspective. I really don't, of this, I think, pseudo academic, like, we must be very, like, serious and dry about everything and blah 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 blah. Like, I can't tell you how many incredible movies reached people because they were remade. I can't tell you how many games that I think people otherwise never would have. Is that I don't know. There's value there, and I have no interest in pretending that there isn't. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, because it's like, why do we have to pretend like a remake is going to be the canonical replacement for an earlier work? Now, of course, as we mentioned at the top of the episode, like, that does happen with companies and stuff and stuff like that. So it is that's a fine enough part of the conversation. If that's the real worry, and it's hey, I don't want a remake of Super Metroid, because if Super Metroid the remake comes out and then Nintendo just disappears the original Super Metroid, yeah. But again, that's like a separate conversation from, like, these remakes as actual works of art and actually trying to do something with them. I think about talking about Bloodborne, right? If you did a Bloodborne remake, what does it add? Other than if you're just doing a surface level remake of it, a visual upgrade to it, is that truly taking that next step to be a really substantial piece of art? It might. And as we said with that Last of Us Part 1 remake, it's like, it could introduce new people to it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But when it comes to just like the demand for something like that, I always find it so interesting that no one really wants it to be that different. No one wants some new interpretation, it feels like.
And there's always, like, this strange thing that pops up in video games right now, I think, because it is so part of the current cultural conversation about, like, what people are investing money into and, like, where developer resources are you know, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
As like an artistic critic, these kinds of issues and this kind of, like, from the outside looking in, prognosticating about the corporate decisions or whatever, this is not where I live, and I'm not particularly interested in this conversation. But
yes,
I think that something that is maybe neglected as kind of a fact of this situation is that oftentimes, in the case of, like, that Last of Us remake, I'm going to say that the Last of Us remake took a fraction of the resources to make as, I don't know, the Last of Us 2.
Almost certainly, right?
Almost certainly. And I think that, like, sometimes we're like kidding ourselves with this, like, oh, the waste of time and energy and meh, meh, meh. And it's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, what are you talking about? One, there's no way that this was like some, it doesn't even matter. I think my point is that, like, people enjoy this thing and got value out of this thing. And I think to, like, spit in their face and say, no, you should have gotten enjoyment out of the original thing instead, it's just unrealistic and operating, again, from this, like, heightened academic perspective that I'm just not at all interested in entertaining.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned something here that I think is a fundamental pillar of our podcast that, like, I think is an overarching theme that I've sort of tracked, and I've tracked some people, I think, misinterpret it across the board, where, like, when we talk about this stuff, I'm a far better art critic than I am an industry analyst.
Sure.
And the industry analysis side of things I can do, I guess, but, like, I'm just simply not that interested in it. It's fine enough to be like, oh, what are these companies doing, this, that, whatever. And we can do that. But at the end of the day, a lot of these conversations I want to have purely from an artistic standpoint. And I understand that there is an intersection of the artistic with the corporate side. But, like, when we talk about this sort of thing, or a lot of the other topics on this show, there's an implied, at least for me, like, hey, we're talking about the work. We're talking about the art. We're not necessarily talking about, like, all of the context surrounding it from the industry side, which is important, but sometimes that, like, people I think get a little too in the weeds about trying to talk about that when actually I think I want to talk about the art. Would you say that's fair?
I would, and I think just in terms of my own personal value system, something that I want to stress is just that I do think that you have to reach people, and I think creating some great thing that nobody plays, I question the value of that. And I know that there is this kind of heightened artistic perspective where the value of these pursuits should feed this thing inside of us. That's all well and good. But am I happier for the team that puts out a game and then it does poorly and has to and everybody gets laid off in a month than I am the team that bought themselves another year because they did a remake?
Everyone hates a punk band when they sign to a major record label. You know what I mean? Because then now it all changes.
Peter, I want to give a shout out,
please,
to all of the people that make this podcast possible. I am, of course, talking to the members of the Critical Error Nation for no reason other than to express the kindness and appreciation of their hearts. We, of course, have people at the highest level, the Jake and Peter tier, for $20 a month. I cannot believe it every time I revisit this page. We're, of course, talking about Andrew Bolkar, Ansel Trait, Evan Snee, Mayro, and Robert Quesada. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast.
Yes.
At patreon.com/critical error. You are right here with us each and every week, and we really appreciate you. Now, before we get to our final moments of the podcast, Peter, where you'll be sharing a pre-written piece with us, we, of course, have to play the sound that we play every week in honor of our Critical Error royalty members. So $5 and up obviously gets you access to the bonus podcast, but the $10 and up, they get to be included every week in a original sound. I'm not just gonna read the names. I'm gonna create some kind of stupid thing. Now,
it's gonna be
how could I remake a sound? Now
this is something.
How would I go about? Now this has been swirling around in my head for a minute here. I don't know if it's possible, but I love the because the names change. But
that's fair.
Yeah. But I've just been toying around with that in my head of could I do some kind of indicative of a remake sound effect for the nation? So that's maybe
reimagining.
A reimagine. Okay.
Do you know what I mean? That's because that's the thing we're pushing for, right? I think is we're more interested in a reimagining than a remake.
Okay, so members of the Critical Error royalty, you might find something strange about your names in this.
Ooh,
you might find something
strange
has happened to your names here. So it's a different take. It's a different take on typically reading out the names of the Critical Error royalty members. So let's listen to that right now.
Hey Christian, this week's Critical Error podcast is about remakes and having taking the same source material, doing it differently. And I thought it would be fun if you read out the names of the patrons for this episode. Let me know if you can do that, and I'll just stick your little phone recording right in the pod.
Okay, so Jake wanted a phone recording, but it sounded terrible. So instead, I am recording on the Elgato, and unless it's an aesthetic choice to do a phone recording, then I'm going to do a wavelength recording for the Critical Error Nation patrons, whom are Pinky Oates, Sam Woods, Andrew Bolkar, Kale Chow, Connor Truelove, Evan Snee, Cole, Jared Cousineau, Mayro, Danny Disaster, Shin, Jacob Richter, Robert Iseda, Mitch Dyer, Ansel Trait, James Pierre Reed, and Thick Dick Mystic. Okay.
And here we go, closing out this exceptional episode of the Critical Error Podcast. Thank you so much, patreon.com/critical error. Each and every week, one of us shares a pre-written piece, trying to be intentional, trying to be specific, trying to achieve something. Peter, what was your angle this week? What did you choose to attack?
You know what's funny? I feel like I've gotten away from writing about video games in these. These pieces, and I was like, let me write something about a game, and let me write about something that's been sort of on the mind. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit shorter, I think, than what we've been doing in the past, but I don't think that's necessarily bad.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah,
I just thought Highguard was fun, man. Here's the deal. Of course, it's sad that all the people who made the game have lost their jobs now that it's officially being shut down later this month. But I don't really want to talk about that. Enough people have been eulogizing a game they didn't look at for more than 2 matches online. And like, what else is there to say? Broken industry. Yeah. Studio mismanagement. Yeah. But like, it was also just a fun game. There's something to be said for the fleeting gaming experiences that exist as a result of online multiplayer games that can disappear overnight. I'm still bummed that Simpsons Fortnite is gone. But with Highguard, I think I'm satisfied with my experience with it as a player. I put over 20 hours into Highguard with 2 of my good friends, but we stopped playing. Partially because we felt like the game's inevitable shutdown was just a matter of time, which it was, but also because we had had our fill. The final moments I spent with Highguard had me laughing my ass off after me and my friends switched the language settings over to Spanish so that they could make fun of my broken pronunciations as the only non-native speaker in the chat. That final session, as I was poring over the Hugar menu in search of new phrases to say during Highguard's Episodio Dos, felt like watching the end credits for the game. Highguard wasn't packed to the brim with content, so we had seen everything we needed to see in those 20 hours, searching the game's depths for anything resembling a good time, and the Spanish language translation was where we found our final enjoyment. Maybe there was more content planned to be added to the game that would have ripped our attention away from whatever other multiplayer game has it now, but there wasn't, and now there never will be. So I guess that's just it. Highguard was a game that made me laugh and had some exhilarating chases across maps designed for riding like the armies of every nation on Earth was on your tail. It was good, sometimes even great. But how many times can you go on that ride, though, before you're ready for something else? Before saddling up and trekking across the map starts feeling like business as usual? I liked Highguard a lot, and I'm sad for the people who are losing their livelihoods because of studio mismanagement, but the death of Highguard already happened for me. Its anchor stone already detached from my life. I never learned Spanish from it, but I find it difficult to imagine that because of that night that I'll ever forget what Hugar means. And I think it's nice that a piece of art gets to live on like that for me. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Oh my God. Okay, I'm glad we got to give a nod on the pod to our extremely good times in playing Highguard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we're some of the biggest Highguard fans on the internet.
Truly. Must be.
And I feel okay with bearing that cross. I think like something that like really saddens me about this entire situation is I think the failure of kind of the apparatus surrounding video games to actually like write about Highguard, and instead 98% of the conversation is just around the marketing and the business and
That's kind of what I was getting at the end of, at the end of the podcast here, where it was like, here's the thing, we could talk about the studio mismanagement and the industry and whatever and Tencent or whatever the fuck, and like that's fine, we can do that.
Yeah.
But it's like, can we also not just talk about like the art, like the game of it? Because like that's the thing. I think the industry analyst stuff is like more on the nose. It's simpler. I think it's not to say it's easier necessarily, but like, let's talk about the art. Let's talk about the game. Is that not also worth discussing? Because I think it is.
It's tough. I think that talking about the game is just too hard for people, if I'm being honest. And I think the industry analyzing from the outside is just much easier. It's easier to post a tweet about. It's easier to kind of like sum up your position in a sentence so that other people can kind of co-opt that position and posture about how smart they are about the state of the video game industry, which I think is important to people. And I don't know, it's this weird thing where you and I we played a little bit of Marathon over the weekend. We tried it out, and it was one of these games that the second I started playing it, it really kind of hit me over the head with this feeling of, all right, I got to pay attention. I got to like, there's stuff here I got to learn, and that's okay. And I think like a lot of people might have criticisms of that game because it doesn't immediately all make sense to them. And I think some of that, depending on how you approach that, I think there are different levels of validity to that. I think sometimes you need to sit with a piece for a long enough time to assess what it's doing. I think that the idea that you should immediately understand, I don't know, there are sentences in Pride and Prejudice that I've read a million times, and then I come back to on my 25th reading and I go, I think I get this now. And it's like, we don't really give ourselves that opportunity in video games because you want to, especially as somebody that plays a lot of video games, your expectation is that you should be immediately good at it. And something that I noticed with Highguard was that I think it was so easy for people to position themselves as the knower of what Highguard was. Yeah, it was once it was revealed at Jeff Keighley's show, I know what that means. Once you jump in and you see this weird 3v3 game, once you see the Steam numbers not being as good as Apex Legends, there were all these things that were begging you to go, I know exactly what this is. But all of that stuff had nothing to do with the game. So I think that whenever I see Highguard discussed online, I'm really kind of struck by how divorced from the game it is. So often conversations like boil down to me being like, you know, if that's your opinion on the game, that's fine. But it also just like, to me as someone who played, you know, like 20 hours of it, like it sounds like you just didn't play it that much. And that's okay. You don't have to play something entirely to have like a take or anything like that. Like that's something we are proponents of here. But like at the very least, I think there's a certain level of like, if we're going to talk about the game, we should be talking about the game with people who played the game as people who played the game. Right. And yeah, I don't know, like it's interesting because I could write about the actual like mechanics of Highguard and this, that, whatever. But that like literally that final time playing it where we're like laughing about the Spanish stuff and like, I guess like not laughing at the Spanish of it, because obviously that's not like inherently funny, but like laughing at me trying to pronounce, you know, what is it? Hugar Illidan? You nailed it.
Is that Hugar?
No, it was perfect. It was perfect.
Okay.
You nailed it. Yeah.
But like it was just so funny here too, from like you and Christian like talking about like it's insane like to see like the Hugar menu, the fact that it's not just the English is changed to Spanish in the like voice acting whatever, but like there's a Spanish language version of the game that's just there, you know. I think that's fun.
And what was funny about that too is that we saw some of the things that they very quickly kind of rushed to add after the game came out, like the 5v5 mode. When we changed over to the Spanish language setting, those menus were not translated.
Yeah, those were in English still.
Yeah, so kind of a fun little cultural artifact there of some evidence, if you will, of maybe how that went.
But I will say, like, the thing for me that I find to be sort of that I hit on at the end of this piece is like talking about like, oh, but like, you know, this game is gone and like, and it, you know, it's tragic that all these people lost their livelihoods and all that. But like at the end of the day, like I am not going to forget what Hugar means. I like that's in here, and it's because of that game. And anytime if I ever hear the word Hugar, I'm going to crack a little smile. To be honest with you.
So
like,
that's good. That's good.
Yeah, not that it's coming up that often, but like if it ever does, I'm gonna be like, that's
you got it. You got it. All right, well. I think we got to end this pod just by pouring one out for Highguard. So a little ceremonial drip, if you will.
There it is. Here it is. I got my water bottle right here.
To Highguard.
To Highguard.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Oh my gosh.